Contest involves the state superintendent of public instruction. In the Republican race, incumbent Tom Horn is facing a challenge from state treasurer Kimberly Yee. They have been at odds over the management of Arizona's school voucher program. On the Democratic side, behavioral therapist Brett Newby faces longtime educator Teresa Ruiz. Both of them want more oversight of the state's voucher program. Department of Education reports show the school voucher program is costing nearly $1 billion. The next superintendent could change the program's future.
13 News education reporter Isabella Lisco joins us now in studio with more on how we got here.
Thanks so much, Dan. Yeah, in 2011, Arizona lawmakers created the voucher program for students with disabilities. Taxpayers then challenged the program, and the United States Supreme Court ruled it could continue. In 2022, so about a decade later, Arizona expanded the voucher program, and now anyone can apply. But critics say the system costs taxpayers too much money with too little accountability. Teacher unions across the country oppose the voucher system.
This has been a Trojan horse that has brought in, huge amounts of destruction. It ultimately continues to undermine public schools by having resources drained away from us.
Around 100,000 Arizona students currently use voucher funds. Love Your School CEO Jenny Clark has 5 kids in the program. It all started when 2 were diagnosed with dyslexia and couldn't get the help they needed in public school.
You are put in a position where you're really having to fight for services and for resources.
Over the years, Clark has used voucher money to pay for tutors, private school, and homeschooling. But critics say there's not enough oversight. Families using voucher money do not have to report education progress.
People would be up in arms if they knew public dollars to this extent, over $1 billion, were being used haphazardly and without accountability streams.
And that's where the superintendent can step in. The next superintendent could push for more staff and stronger oversight of the program. Clark says she supports accountability, but that it already exists.
We have to upload a receipt for every single transaction. We have to upload credentials for every single tutor and therapist. So I would argue that we jump through more hoops than the traditional public school system.
So is the voucher program a costly drain on public schools or an education lifeline? Tonight, voters decide. Republican superintendent candidates support the voucher system, and Democratic candidates say they'll implement more accountability. And we'll be tracking that race tonight as results come in later. I'll keep you updated from right here as we learn more. Isabella Lisco, 13 News.